She heard the screaming before she could make sense of it, a raw, jagged sound tearing down the stone corridor like a warning she was already too late to answer. Before she could spin around, a pair of iron, strong arms locked around her waist and yanked her backward into shadow. A large hand pressed hard over her mouth. Not a sound. The voice was low, almost a growl against her ear. "Or they will find us." Her heart slammed against her ribs. She turned her face just enough to look at him, and what she saw stopped the protest cold in her throat. Later, she would whisper it to herself like a confession. "There is no man alive who can command me, but he is not just any man. He is a wolf." And in that fractured, torchlit instant, pinned between stone and a stranger, she discovered something no one had ever warned her about. The most dangerous bonds are the ones you don't choose. Quick pause before we continue. If you're watching this from somewhere in the world right now, let me know in the comments. I read every single one. And if you're enjoying stories like this, make sure to hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell, because tomorrow's episode, it goes even deeper than this. Chapter 1. The guard the training yard smelled of iron and cold leather, and Wren wouldn't have had it any other way. She absorbed the horizontal strike with her forearm, feeling the shudder travel all the way to her shoulder, then pivoted with the fluid precision of someone who had been taught by consequence rather than comfort. Her boot caught the soldier square in the ribs. He staggered. She pressed the advantage immediately. A sharp twist of her wrist stripped the blade from his grip, and a moment later he was on one knee in the dirt, gasping for air. "Again!" she said. Her voice was even. It was always even. The soldier looked up at her with an expression caught halfway between exhaustion and reverence. But he rose. He always rose, because Wren did not accept anything less. Around the edges of the yard, other guards had paused their drills to watch. Some wore poorly hidden admiration. Others wore poorly hidden doubt. Wren ignored both. She had learned years ago that opinions didn't sharpen blades, and only results changed minds. Being a woman in a kingdom where swords were considered the exclusive inheritance of men required more than skill. It required proving that skill over and over, every morning in the cold, until no one had the nerve to question it again. The northern air bit at her face, and she was grateful for it. Pain kept the mind sharp. She was resetting her stance when movement at the main gate caught her eye. A column of riders was approaching under banners that snapped and twisted in the wind, not a trading caravan, not a messenger. Too large, too deliberate. "Who are they?" she asked the soldier she just dismantled. He climbed to his feet and brushed dust from his trousers. "Must be the delegation from the south. The king's been expecting them. Some kind of alliance." Something settled uneasily in Wren's stomach at the word alliance. Alliance meant negotiation, and negotiation between kingdoms almost always had a price. And the price was almost always a woman's future wrapped up in silk and called a wedding. She thought of Princess Isolde, of the careful way the princess had been smiling lately, too wide, too practiced. She forced her gaze toward the riders. There were things she expected to see: proud horses, fine cloaks, the particular posture of men who had grown up being told they were important. What she did not expect was the man at the front. He rode like someone who had never learned how not to command a room, even when the room was an open road and the sky. Broad across the shoulders, something almost predatory in the ease of his movement. Even from across the yard at this distance, with all this noise between them, Wren felt something cold slide down her spine that had nothing to do with the northern air. She looked away, forced her attention back to the soldier, back to training. But the feeling of being watched from somewhere, by someone, didn't leave her for the rest of the morning. Declan dismounted with the kind of effortless grace that comes from a lifetime of expecting the ground to meet you exactly where you need it. The Northern Kingdom was smaller than his own. He'd noted it immediately, the way a general catalogues terrain before committing to movement. But it was strategically valuable. King Aldrich's position along the trade routes could resolve border vulnerabilities that had cost Declan's people dearly through 2 winters. An arranged marriage was simply the currency of diplomacy. He was prepared to pay it. He hadn't even met the princess. The fortifications are impressive for a kingdom this size. Garrett, his beta and closest advisor, materialized at his shoulder, pale eyes moving in the systematic sweep of a man cataloging everything as either asset or threat. Declan nodded, but his attention had already moved elsewhere. In the training yard to the east, a figure moved like water poured through a blade, all controlled momentum and precision. A woman. He sharpened his senses instinctively, watching as she spun to absorb a strike, redirected it, and dropped a man twice her size with a kick that had looked almost casual. For a single moment, the angle of the winter sun caught her face. Dark hair, sharp jaw, eyes that held their own light even from this distance. Something in his chest went very still, then very loud. His inner wolf, usually disciplined to the point of silence, lurched forward like a dog straining a leash. "Garrett," he kept his voice controlled. "Find out who she is." His beta followed the direction of his gaze and raised one measured eyebrow. "The one in the training yard?" "Yes." Garrett said nothing further, which was one of the many things Declan valued about him. He was shown to his chambers, changed out of travel clothes, reviewed the schedule for the evening's dinner with King Aldrich. He performed each task with the systematic efficiency that had earned him the loyalty of an entire kingdom. He did not think about the woman in the training yard. He thought about her constantly. "Control yourself," he ordered inwardly. "You are here for duty." But when he caught himself crossing to the window for the 4th time to look down at the now empty yard, he accepted that control was going to cost him more than usual. The castle at night was a different creature, quieter, sharper, full of the kind of silence that could be hiding anything. Wren moved through the upper corridors with her steps muffled to near nothing, one hand hovering near the dagger at her hip, not because she expected trouble, because expecting nothing was how you got killed. Isolde was in her chambers with 2 trusted guards posted outside. The arrangement was sufficient, but Wren would not be satisfied until she had personally confirmed that every access point was secure, every shadow was just shadow. She was turning toward the east wing, heading away from the great hall, where voices and torch light signaled the dinner's close, when the first scream split the night. Wren froze. The second scream arrived with the clash of metal. She was already running. The central courtyard had become a disaster. Guards lay across the stone in various states of injury, some motionless, some dragging themselves toward the walls, leaving dark smears behind them. Masked figures moved through the space with practiced efficiency, looting, breaking, hunting. One was working on the door to the east tower. Wren didn't deliberate. She built momentum in 3 strides, spun, and delivered a kick to the attacker's rib cage that folded him sideways like a wet page. He went down with a grunt. 2 more emerged immediately from the shadows flanking her. She blocked the first strike, barely pivoted, dragged her blade across the second man's forearm. Blood. A shout. But before she could reset, a third attacker was already circling behind her, and from the doorway she could see 4 more pushing in. Too many. The calculation was instant and cold. Too many and more coming. She turned to find a gap and run, and the world yanked backward. A forearm locked across her midsection like a bar of iron. A large hand closed over her mouth before she could shout. She was pressed against something solid and warm, a wall, no, not a wall, a person, and dragged into the shadow of a stone pillar just as the next wave of masked figures rushed past in the corridor. The hand over her mouth didn't grip. It held, firm without cruelty. Not a sound. The voice at her ear was so low it barely qualified as sound, more like a shape pressed into the air. Or they'll find us. Every muscle in her body went rigid. Then the scent reached her. Pine, rain-soaked earth, something utterly wild that had no business being in a castle corridor. Not a guard. So who? You're far too lovely to be out of bed at this hour. The voice again, still barely above a murmur, but now carrying something intolerable, an arrogance so effortless it had clearly never been challenged. Leave this to the men. The rage came up so fast it nearly blinded her. Wren twisted her head and bit down on the hand covering her mouth. Hard. He made a sound more startled than pained, and his grip fractured just enough. She wrenched free, spun on her heel, and came face to face with the man who had ridden through the gate that morning. The visitor from the south. Up close, he was more everything. Taller, broader, filling the torchlight and the shadow in equal measure. His eyes were a shade of gold she'd never seen outside of autumn leaves, and they were fixed on her with an expression that mixed amusement with something else she didn't have time to identify. There is no man alive who can command me. She bit each word off clean. Then she stepped backward into the chaos and ran toward the fight. Behind her, she heard nothing. But somehow she knew he was smiling. Declan stood in the shadow of the pillar for exactly 1 second after she vanished. Then the smile faded into something harder, and he let the shift take him. It wasn't violent, it never was for him. Just a settling, bone and muscle and intent rearranging into their truest shape. Where the king had stood, a massive wolf now occupied the space, black as char, eyes burning amber, every line of him radiating controlled ferocity. He went into the fight like a current of dark water. 3 of the masked attackers fell before any of them understood what had hit them. Garrett appeared at his flank in wolf form, already directing the castle guards to tighten the perimeter, cutting off the exits with methodical precision. Declan fought with one eye always finding her. He couldn't help it. She moved through the combat like someone who had nothing left to lose, no hesitation, no retreat, meeting men twice her size with the kind of courage that doesn't come from training, but from something harder and older. She was magnificent in a way that made something ache behind his ribs. When the last attacker was pinned and the courtyard had gone to heavy breathing and the sound of blood dripping, Declan shifted back. Garrett handed him a tunic. Across the courtyard, Wren wiped her blade clean on the hem of her shirt. She looked at him exactly once, a single measuring glance that lasted perhaps 2 seconds, and then walked into the castle shadows without a word. Declan kept his expression neutral. Very interesting, he thought. His wolf thought considerably more than that, and none of it was neutral. Morning delivered answers shaped like new problems. Under questioning, the surviving attackers had confessed. They'd been hired, paid well, given entry points by someone inside the castle. The precision of the operation pointed to inside knowledge that only a few people could have had access to. "This was never a random raid," Garrett said, studying the castle layout spread across the table in their quarters. "Someone with resources and patience arranged this, and whoever gave them access is still free." Declan's expression didn't change, but the line of his jaw tightened. The informant's been identified, but he didn't necessarily act alone. "Agreed." Garrett folded his arms. "I'll leave 10 of my men here, discreet, experienced, loyal. They'll reinforce the night watches and review every entrance and exit." He paused. "And I'll open a deeper investigation. I want to know who hired these people and why this kingdom. King Aldrich will accept that. We'll present it as diplomatic courtesy. Small kingdom, vulnerable borders, any sensible ruler accepts reinforcement when it's offered respectfully." Declan nodded. It was the right call. Clean, measured, necessary. He should have been thinking about nothing else. He was already thinking about the meeting scheduled for mid-morning, the formal introduction to Princess Isolde. Duty, he reminded himself. You are here for duty. The castle gardens in winter were severe and pale, bare trees, frost-stiffened hedges, the first cautious roses attempting the air at the southern-facing wall. Princess Isolde waited in the center path with all the practiced grace of someone who had been preparing for this particular performance her entire life. She was genuinely beautiful, golden hair braided with precision, pale eyes clear and composed, posture that announced her station before she opened her mouth. Declan crossed the garden toward her. A proper greeting was already forming in his mind. Then he saw who was standing one step behind her. The world didn't exactly slow. It narrowed to her, to the dark hair pinned at the nape of her neck, to the set of her jaw and the way her hand rested 3 inches from the dagger at her hip, even in a peaceful garden, because she was always watching the exits. His wolf went absolutely silent, and then in the silence began to roar. No, he thought. Not now, not here. Declan forced his eyes back to Isolde, bowed, said the correct things, asked the correct questions. Let Isolde take the lead in the conversation because it was her stage and she knew every mark on it. He managed nearly 30 seconds before his gaze moved. Wren was watching him with the particular expression of someone who has assessed a threat and already decided how many places they'd have to hit to put it down. When their eyes met, something invisible connected, something that had no business existing between 2 people who'd had one violent, whispered exchange in a chaotic corridor 12 hours ago. Declan held her gaze just long enough to be deliberate, then looked back at Isolde. "And who is your companion?" he asked, knowing exactly what he was doing. "This is Wren," Isolde said, her tone brightening with the particular warmth of someone describing a useful possession. "My lady-in-waiting. And my personal guard. Personal guard. Of course." Declan inclined his head toward Wren. "A pleasure." She said nothing. She simply looked at him with those ember-dark eyes, promising all manner of violence, and Declan thought with a clarity that surprised him that he had never in his life encountered anyone so thoroughly interesting. Wren wanted to remove herself from the situation with extreme urgency and possibly also a change of name. The walk back to the castle was accomplished in tightly managed silence, Isolde 3 steps ahead, Wren in her usual position behind and slightly to the right, close enough to move, far enough not to intrude. "He's handsome, isn't he?" Isolde said without turning around. Wren's jaw tightened. "I didn't notice." Isolde laughed, that bright, precise sound that never quite reached her eyes. "Liar." With pure, unambiguous hatred, Wren thought firmly. I looked at him with pure hatred, but she said nothing. She kept walking, kept scanning the corridor ahead, kept doing every single thing that was her job, and tried very hard to ignore the fact that even from several floors away, she could still somehow sense the particular quality of the air where he was standing. She was not going to think about what that meant. Chapter 2. The wolf Declan didn't sleep. He lay in the darkened chamber for hours, staring at the carved ceiling, listening to the castle breathe around him, and his inner wolf simply refused to settle. It paced. It circled. It shoved at the bars of his control with an insistence he had never felt before from it, not in 30 years of disciplined coexistence. Wren. The name arrived without permission and stayed. At dawn, he abandoned the pretense of rest and found Garrett in the training yard. "You've already found out everything," Declan said. It wasn't a question. Garrett turned with an expression that walked the careful line between amusement and self-preservation. "About the woman you haven't been able to stop thinking about. Watch your tone." "Wren Calloway," Garrett said, ignoring him entirely. 24 years old. Lost her parents to an epidemic when she was 12. She was taken in by the castle afterward. Started as a servant. At 15, she intercepted an assault on Princess Isolde using nothing but a kitchen knife. The attacker never got near the princess. Declan was very still. She was 15. King Aldrich allowed her to train with the guards after that. There was significant resistance to the idea, as you might expect. She outlasted all of it. She is now one of the most capable fighters in this castle by any honest accounting. Loyal to the princess beyond question, sleeps in the adjacent chamber, trusts no one else with Isolde's safety. Each detail added itself to the image Declan was already building with involuntary precision. Anything else? Garrett hesitated. The guards say she has never shown particular interest in anyone, man or woman. It is, as they put it, like trying to engage with iron. Something possessive and entirely inappropriate coiled in Declan's chest. He closed his eyes, breathed, reached for every discipline he had spent decades building. "Garrett!" His voice came out lower and rougher than intended. She's my mate." The silence that followed had a specific texture, the texture of a man choosing his next words with the care of someone diffusing something. "Are you certain?" "Completely." Declan opened his eyes. "My wolf recognized her the moment I saw her. When I held her last night," he stopped. "I have never felt anything like it. Every part of me is insisting that she is mine." Garrett's expression was carefully neutral. "You are promised to the princess. Do you think I don't know that?" The frustration came out sharper than intended. "Do you think I don't understand the full scope of what this means?" He turned away. "I can't marry Isolde, not now, not knowing what I know. I need to find a way to dissolve the arrangement without causing open conflict. I need my advisors to weigh in." Garrett was quiet for a moment. Then, "Whatever you decide, I stand with you." Declan placed a hand on his friend's shoulder briefly. "I know." He left the yard with his thoughts already rushing ahead, already reaching against every rational effort, for a pair of eyes that looked at him like a problem waiting to be solved. Wren splashed cold water on her face and told herself she'd simply had a bad night. She'd had plenty of bad nights. Patrol injuries, nightmares about the epidemic years, the particular sleeplessness that comes from high-stakes responsibility. She knew how to manage all of it. What she did not know how to manage was this: the way the memory of a stranger's arm around her waist kept surfacing between one thought and the next. The scent of pine and rain. The infuriating, effortless arrogance of "leave this to the men." And then, underneath all of it, like an ember she couldn't locate well enough to stomp out the heat. Pathetic, she told herself. Absolutely pathetic. "Wren!" Isolde's voice from the adjoining room. "Are you awake?" "Yes, Your Highness." She dried her face and stepped through the doorway. Isolde sat at her mirror while a maid worked at her hair, and she was wearing an expression Wren had learned to read years ago, the one that meant she was about to deploy pleasantness in the service of some specific goal. "I'll need you with me today," the princess said. "King Declan and I are spending the morning together, getting to know one another." Her eyes in the mirror were bright and searching. "He's quite something, isn't he?" "If Your Highness says so." Wren retreated to her chamber to dress. She moved efficiently through the ritual leather trousers, dark-fitted tunic, boots designed for silence, hair secured, every weapon in place. When she returned, Isolde was ready. Blue gown, flawless composure, the particular radiance of a woman who knows exactly how the light falls on her face. In the gardens, Declan had his back to them when they arrived, studying the frost-laced rose bushes with apparent calm. He turned. And Wren, despite every preparation, felt the air leave her lungs in a way she could not account for by any physical mechanism. He was even more striking in daylight. Of course he was. His gaze swept to Isolde first, courteous, appropriate. Then, for exactly 1 second, it found Wren. 1 second. Enough to send her heart into a pattern she didn't recognize. She looked at the garden wall. She counted stones. She focused on the 2 guards posted at the eastern entrance. She performed every mental exercise she had ever developed for remaining present and functional. Behind her, Isolde laughed at something Declan said and touched his arm with proprietary ease. Something uncomfortable moved through Wren's chest. She refused to name it. The formal courtship meetings continued for 3 days. Isolde was meticulous in her campaign. She spoke of the wedding with architectural specificity, of their shared future with the confidence of someone reading from a blueprint, of the children they would raise between kingdoms with a warmth that sounded completely genuine. Declan's responses were impeccable. Polite, measured, perfectly calibrated to encourage without committing. But Wren could see the truth of him in the things his expression didn't quite manage to conceal. The slight tension across his shoulders when Isolde touched his arm, the fractional pause before each diplomatic answer, the way his eyes moved when Isolde wasn't watching him. They moved to her every time, always back to her. Stop, she told him silently on the second day. He didn't. Stop, she told herself. She didn't either. At night, she retreated to the stables. The horses were reliable company. They didn't want anything from her, didn't watch her in a way that suggested they knew things she hadn't told anyone. The scent of hay and leather helped untangle her thoughts. She was brushing the roan mare one evening when she heard footsteps she hadn't heard before but somehow already recognized. The weight of them, the rhythm, the particular confidence in how they fell. She kept brushing. "You need to stop following me," she said, without turning around. "Then stop being somewhere worth finding," Declan said. Chapter 3. The stream he was losing his mind, and he knew it. Every dinner beside Isolde was a performance that cost him something. Every conversation about wedding preparations felt like pressing a bruise. His advisors had not yet responded to his letter. Garrett maintained careful neutrality. And Wren existed in the same castle as him, which had turned out to be approximately the same as existing inside his skull. On the fourth night, when the dinner finally ended and he could no longer tolerate the four walls of his borrowed chamber, Declan saddled a horse and rode into the forest. He rode without direction, letting the stallion choose. The trees were ancient here, dark, dense, pulling the light out of the sky long before it reached the ground. His wolf ran beneath his skin, restless and demanding, and he gave it movement instead of what it actually wanted. He heard the water before he saw it. A stream cutting through the lower valley, cold and clear. He guided the horse toward it. And then he saw the second horse, a chestnut mare, standing at the bank with the easy patience of an animal who's been here before. Declan frowned. He dismounted, followed the sound of movement through the brush. He pushed a branch aside, stopped. Wren stood in the stream to her waist, her back to him, her dark hair loose and floating on the surface like silk spread over water. She'd removed her outer tunic, wore only a thin shift beneath, plastered transparent to her skin by the water. Sunlight through the leaves struck her in scattered gold. She was washing her face with her eyes closed, completely unguarded, all the armor she wore in the castle simply absent. Just a person. Just a woman who looked in this moment like she'd been created specifically to undo him. Declan forgot to breathe. Leave, he told himself. Turn around and go. His foot found a branch. The crack detonated through the silence like a gunshot. Wren spun with the reflexes of someone who doesn't have the luxury of being startled, one hand already reaching for the dagger that wasn't there. Her eyes found him, recognition, then fury. "You!" The word came out like an accusation. Declan raised his hands slowly. He was, despite himself, smiling. "I could ask you the same question." I was here first. Her face was flushed, rage or embarrassment, he couldn't separate them. Leave. Technically, he said, stepping toward the bank while keeping a respectful distance, this forest belongs to King Aldrich. Neither of us should be here without permission. You're being insufferable. You're adorable when you're irritated. Her eyes flashed. I will. You're unarmed, he said, not unkindly. Soaked, and I outweigh you by a considerable margin. Muscle means nothing when you know exactly where to strike. I don't doubt it. He looked at her, really looked at her, letting none of the practiced neutrality he wore in the castle into his expression. You fight better than most of my own guard, I'm telling you that honestly. She studied him with obvious suspicion. Why are you being kind? Can I be? Not from you, no. He laughed, genuine, unguarded, surprised out of him. It echoed through the trees. You truly hate me that much. Yes. The word came out too fast, too urgent. Liar, he said softly. Get out of here. Her voice wavered at the edge. Now, not until you're out of the water. She stared at him. He stared back. The stream moved around her without caring about either of them. Finally, with a sound of pure frustrated fury, Wren stepped out of the water. Declan made the mistake of looking. The wet shift left nothing to interpretation. Water trailed in paths across her skin. Her dark hair fell over her shoulders in waves. She was extraordinary, and he stood there with his lungs entirely empty of air and thought nothing coherent for several seconds. Stop, she snapped, grabbing her tunic and pulling it on in sharp, deliberate movements. Stop what? His voice was rougher than it should have been. Looking at me like you have the right. He stepped closer, couldn't stop himself. What if I told you it feels like I do? Then I'd say you're insane. Maybe. He stopped a foot from her, close enough that her scent reached him, fresh water and something purely, irreducibly her. You're driving me insane, Wren. I've tried to stop. I haven't managed it for 4 days running. Stop. Her voice had changed, quieter, less certain. Stop what? Noticing you, thinking about you every hour. I can't, Wren. He lifted his hand slowly, giving her every chance, every moment to step away. When she didn't, he touched her face. Traced the line of her jaw like it was something he was committing to memory for later. You are the most beautiful thing I have ever seen, and it... A tear slipped free from the corner of her eye. Don't do this. Please don't make this harder. Harder would be staying away. Declan. His name on her lips was the last coherent thing that happened. He kissed her. It wasn't gentle, it couldn't be, not after everything that had compressed into these 4 impossible days. It was desperate, hungry, the kiss of someone who has been holding their breath for too long and finally found air. And Wren, after 1 fractured second of stillness, kissed him back with the same ferocity she brought to everything. Her hands fisted in his hair. Her mouth matched his with an urgency that made his wolf howl in triumph. Mine. He pulled her against him. She fit exactly as he'd known she would. The world contained nothing else. It ended with a crack. Her palm connected with his face with the full force of a woman who has spent years building strength specifically for moments that require it. The sound rang out across the forest. Declan didn't dodge it, didn't flinch back. He turned his head slightly from the impact and then slowly lifted 2 fingers to his cheek, said nothing. Wren stood before him, breathing hard, eyes blazing and wet. Don't complicate this. You just struck a king. he said, low, almost amused. She stepped forward and didn't look away. What are you going to do about it? The silence that followed was a living thing. Then Wren mounted her mare in one clean motion and rode hard toward the castle without looking back. Declan remained at the stream bank, hand still at his face, the smile returning slowly against his better judgment. She's going to destroy me, he thought, and I'm going to let her. Wren rode as though something with teeth was gaining on her. What have I done? What have I done? What have I done? She had kissed Isolde's betrothed. She had kissed him back, and she had kissed him with everything she had, and she did not regret it. And that was the worst part, the part that made her want to scream into the winter air. She did not regret a single second. He's not yours. The words came from the part of her that had always been sensible and practical, and had kept her alive through a dozen things that should have killed her. The part that knew exactly how the world worked, and who got to want things and who did not. He's not yours. He never will be. When she reached the stables and handed the mare off to the groom and ran to her quarters, she pressed herself against the closed door and let the tears come that she hadn't let come in years. Because she could hear Isolde's voice through the wall, already speaking of dates for the formal announcement, of her father's impatience, of the glorious future taking shape around her like a story with a predetermined ending. And Wren knew, with the absolute clarity of someone who has never been able to afford illusions, that none of it mattered. The heat, the kiss, the way her heart relocated entirely when he walked into a room. None of it mattered, because she could never take what wasn't hers. What neither of them knew was that Isolde had been watching. Not from the stream, she hadn't followed them there. But from the high window of her chamber, she had watched them ride out separately that afternoon. She had watched Wren return alone, riding like something was chasing her. And she had watched Declan return 20 minutes later with a particular expression on his face that Isolde, who had spent her entire life studying the faces of people she needed to manage, had no difficulty reading. She turned from the window and picked up the necklace at her collarbone, her mother's. She rolled the pendant between her fingers, her expression very still. She had noticed the way he looked at Wren before today. Of course she had. She wasn't a fool. She had simply chosen, strategically, not to address it because addressing it would have required acknowledging it. And acknowledging it would have meant admitting that the thing she had earned, the thing that had been promised to her, might be slipping sideways toward a woman who had started her life scrubbing dishes. The anger that moved through Isolde now was not hot. It was cold, the kind of cold that lasts. "Delia," she said, and a young servant appeared in the doorway. "Your Highness, I need you to do something for me." Isolde's voice was warm as sunlight on water, something that requires absolute discretion. The girl nodded, wide-eyed. "Follow Wren," Isolde said. "Every night report everything to me, where she goes, who she speaks to, what she does." She paused. "Everything." "Yes, Your Highness. You may go." When she was alone, Isolde turned back to the window. The stable was a dark shape in the distance. "Enjoy what you've taken, Wren," she thought, "because this is not over, not remotely." Chapter 4. The dinner the days that followed arranged themselves into something that could only be called elegant torture. Wren saw Declan everywhere the castle allowed, corridors, courtyards, the long gallery during afternoon rounds. Every time, the air changed. Every time, she managed to maintain her expression and her posture, and the careful, professional distance of exactly the correct number of steps behind the princess. Every time, it cost her something. At dinner on the 5th night, Wren stood at her usual post against the great hall wall and watched the high table with the systematic attention that was her job, cataloging exits, monitoring unfamiliar faces, tracking the room's emotional temperature the way a navigator tracks weather. Isolde was luminous that evening in deep green, her conversation animated and pointed. She laughed at the right moments, touched Declan's arm at the right moments, played every beat of the performance with technical perfection. Declan performed adequately in return. He said the correct things. He smiled when smiling was called for. But Wren could read the truth in his body, the jaw that tightened slightly each time Isolde's fingers found his arm, the extra measure of wine he was working through, the way his eyes moved when no one was watching him specifically. They found her every single time. Across the room, through the crowd, through the noise, direct and deliberate and undeniable. "I want you," they said. "I haven't stopped." Wren looked at the south door, counted the number of guards in her peripheral vision, performed mental arithmetic that had nothing to do with math. "Your Majesty." Isolde's voice cut through the ambient noise with surgical precision. "Are you listening?" Declan blinked, turned. "Forgive me, I was distracted." Clearly. Something briefly sharp behind Isolde's smile. "I was saying that Father believes a formal announcement at the full moon would be appropriate, a proper celebration." A silence arrived that stretched about 3 seconds too long. "Isn't that somewhat soon?" Declan said carefully. "We're still becoming acquainted." Isolde's smile held, barely. "We've known of this arrangement for months, Your Majesty. Becoming acquainted is a formality. It's an important formality. What exactly are you uncertain of?" Her voice had climbed exactly 1 note in pitch. Several conversations at the high table had gone quiet. "I simply require more time." Firm. Final. Isolde held his gaze for a long moment, then produced a smile that could have been painted on. "Of course, as you wish." But Wren saw the knuckles whitening around the wine glass, the micro-expression of fury held with iron discipline. "This is going to break," she thought, "all of it. And I am standing in the middle of it." After Isolde dismissed her for the evening, Wren went to the stables. She was midway through brushing the mare when the footsteps came, those particular footsteps that her body had apparently decided to memorize without her permission. "You need to stop following me," she said. "Then stop running." She kept her back to him. "I'm not running. I'm maintaining appropriate distance from a situation that has no good outcome." "Your job involves maintaining appropriate distance in the stables at 10 at night." "My job involves..." She stopped, turned. Found him standing at the stall entrance in the dimness, and the thing she saw in his face stopped her argument entirely. No arrogance, no performance, just a man at the edge of something standing there looking at her like she was both the problem and the only possible solution to it. "Wren," quietly, "look at me." She already was. "I can't do this anymore." He stepped into the stall. Another step. "I can't sit beside her and smile and plan a future that is wrong." Every part of me knows it's wrong. Declan, do you know what it feels like? He ran a hand through his hair. To have half of you performing what's required while the other half screams that every moment of it is a lie. She knew exactly. This is impossible, she said. What if I refuse the marriage? The silence that fell was total. What? She breathed. You heard me. He met her eyes. What if I dissolve it? What if I find a way to cancel the arrangement that doesn't start a war and I... You can't. Panic was immediate and real. The alliance, the trade routes, the border agreements, do you understand what breaking this promise could cost? Both kingdoms, the people who depend on. Then let there be consequences. The ferocity in it made her step back. You're insane. Yes. He crossed the space between them in 2 strides and took her face in his hands, not roughly, just firmly, giving her the full truth in his eyes. Completely and irrevocably insane. But listen, I sent a letter to my advisors the day after I arrived. I am waiting for their response on the most strategic way to handle this. If there is a path through that doesn't cost lives, I will find it. But please don't. His voice roughened. Don't push me away. Let me fix it. Declan, don't. He kissed her again. And this time there was no desperation, only intention. A clear, conscious choice made by both of them with full knowledge of what it cost. Wren kissed him back the same way. The stable corner where clean hay was piled. Torch light from the main row barely reaching them. His hands learning her like something sacred. Her hands in his hair, her body fitting against his with the terrifying rightness of something that has always been true. Tell me to stop, he said against her neck. The rational part of her mind, the part that had kept her alive, that knew exactly whose future was being built in chambers 50 feet above them, screamed. What came out of her mouth was, "Don't stop, please don't stop." Mine, he said. It sounded like a vow and a wound simultaneously. You are mine. Wrong, something whispered. This is wrong. But when he held her afterward, kissed her forehead with a tenderness that had nothing to do with want and everything to do with something older and more permanent, she understood, with a clarity that was more devastating than any sword wound, that she was lost. Completely. Irrevocably. Neither of them saw the shadow at the outer wall. Delia, the young servant, pressed herself flat against the stone, one hand pressed hard over her mouth, her eyes very wide. She had followed Wren every night for a week. The princess, she thought, already backing away on silent feet, is going to want to know about this. Isolde received the news with the composure of someone who had been partially expecting it. She set her hairbrush down. She met the flustered servant's eyes in the mirror. She asked the necessary clarifying questions in a pleasant, even voice. When Delia was gone, Isolde turned to her own reflection and sat with it for a moment. Then she opened a hidden drawer in her desk and removed a small glass vial, clear liquid, stoppered with wax. A potion purchased from a mountain healer months ago as a precaution she'd hoped never to need. She rolled it between her fingers. The candlelight caught it. I'm going to need more than this, she thought. She looked at the calendar on the wall. 3 days to the full moon. She summoned Vera, an older servant, reliable, pragmatic, with the particular loyalty that comes from having much to lose. I need a favor, Isolde said softly, one that requires absolute silence. She pressed the vial and a folded piece of parchment into the woman's hands. "Take this to the healer in the mountains at dawn. Ask for exactly what is written here, not more, not less." Vera read nothing. "It will be done, Your Highness." And Vera. Isolde's smile was immaculate. "If anyone learns of this, I will know nothing about it, and you will bear the full weight of the consequences alone." She paused. "Do you understand?" The servant paled. "Yes, Your Highness." "Excellent, you may go." Alone, Isolde looked toward the window and the dark shape of the stable far below. "Enjoy it, Wren," she thought, with a calm that was far more frightening than fury. Because the ending of this story is mine to write. Chapter 5. The potion in the stable, oblivious to all of it, Declan traced slow patterns along Wren's arm and asked her what she was thinking about. She said, "About how complicated everything has become." She thought about how "I've never felt this before and I can't keep it and I don't know how to survive losing it." "I'll fix it," he said. "I promise." How do you fix something this size?" He cupped her face in his hands. "Because you are my mate, Wren." The stable seemed to hold its breath. "What?" she whispered. "My wolf recognized you the moment I saw you in the training yard." The certainty in his voice was quiet and absolute, the kind that doesn't need to be raised. "I have spent every day since trying to find the rational explanation. There isn't one." He pressed his forehead to hers. "You are my mate, and I will not pretend otherwise." She pulled back, looked at him. "That changes nothing. You are still promised. There are still kingdoms in the balance. Not forever." "Declan." She sat up, began to dress. "I won't let you start a war for me. I won't carry that." Her voice cracked on the last word and she hated it. This was a mistake. A wonderful and terrible mistake. But it can't. Don't say it. It can't happen again. She finally looked at him, let him see what it cost her to say it. "Or I will have to leave this castle entirely. Because I don't know if I can survive staying here and watching you marry her." Before he could find an answer to that, she was gone. Morning arrived with the resolution of certainty. Declan rose with dawn and went directly to Garrett. "I'm ending the engagement." Garrett closed his eyes briefly. "You're certain?" "I have never been more certain of anything. King Aldrich will not receive this easily, and the advisor's response still hasn't arrived. I'll offer compensation, gold, land, expanded trade access, everything except this marriage." The lines of Declan's face were set as stone. "I will not live this lie, Garrett, not now. What will you do first?" "Find Wren, tell her the decision is made." He was already moving. "Then speak to King Aldrich." "And our men?" Declan paused at the door. "Prepare them, quietly, just in case." He searched every place she usually was. The training yard, the armory, the watchtower. The corridor outside Isolde's chamber. Her own quarters, no answer at the knock. Nothing. He tried to catch her scent, which should have been simple, automatic. His wolf had memorized it with the intensity of something cataloging its most important thing. But where her scent should have been, there was only absence. Like she had been erased from the air. Unease became alarm. Alarm became something with teeth. He went to Isolde's chambers and knocked too hard. "Come in," she called, pleasant as ever. She was at the hearth, embroidering with perfect calm. She looked up with a warm, guileless smile. "Your Majesty, what a surprise." "Where is Wren?" The picture of confusion. "Wren, I'm not sure. I gave her the day to herself." A small frown. "Why are you looking for her?" "I need to speak with her." "About?" Too casual, too measured. Declan studied her. Something important. Isolde set her embroidery aside and rose slowly. Interesting. She moved to the window with that particular glide of someone utterly certain of their terrain. I know you know. Declan went still. Isolde turned. I know my fiancé was with my guard in the stables like two. She paused, smiled delicately, like two people who forgot about the rest of us. Isolde, you don't need to explain. She lifted one hand. Her expression had gone, suddenly, to something that looked almost like exhaustion. I've known longer than you think. She walked to the side table. I can't fight destiny. I can't force a man to love me when his heart has already made its choice. She picked up a wine pitcher, her hands perfectly steady. So, let me at least have this one gesture of dignity. She poured 2 cups with the careful attention of someone who needed her hands occupied. Let me toast, she said softly, to what you found. Declan frowned. Something at the edge of his instincts whispered wrong. But this was Isolde, composed, accepting, offering him a cup with a smile that looked completely genuine. He took it. Thank you, I didn't expect. To Ren, she said, lifting her cup. And to brave choices. They drank. The wine was rich and warm. He took several swallows, feeling the heat spread through his chest. He thanked her, turned to leave. He did not see her smile disappear the moment the door closed. The change didn't announce itself. Declan walked the corridor toward his quarters with his mind full of Ren, her name, her face, the decision that was finally made. He was going to find her, tell her, begin dismantling the arrangement that had never fit. And then the thoughts began to thin, like ink in water, like fog rising over a familiar road. Ren. He held onto the name. I need to find. He passed a window, looked out. Saw Isolde in the garden below, her golden hair catching the winter light. Something warm moved through his chest. She's beautiful, he thought. And then he stopped. Because that was true, Isolde was beautiful, but the quality of the thought was wrong. The warmth was wrong. It was the wrong feeling attached to the wrong person, and somewhere very deep, under layers of something soft and suffocating, a part of him was screaming. What is happening to me? But the thought dissolved before he could hold it. The next days moved like a dream with the texture of wax. He agreed to things he heard himself say but didn't quite recognize. He smiled when Isolde touched his arm. He discussed the wedding the way you discuss something that has always been planned. The castle staff exchanged small, satisfied looks. King Aldrich seemed relieved. Everything was fine. Everything was exactly as it should be. But somewhere very far down in the part of him where his wolf lived and remembered things, a name kept surfacing and dissolving like something drowning. Dark eyes, hair like ink, a defiant smile and the feeling of coming home. Who? Gone before he could reach it. Ren woke in darkness. She did not know how she had gotten there. She did not know how long she had been there. She knew her wrists were bound behind her and that the space around her was stone and iron and a thin thread of light from somewhere too far above to reach. A dungeon. Memory arrived in pieces. The stable. Isolde's suggestion that she take the day. The ride to clear her head. The unfamiliar guards waiting. And then nothing. Cecilia, she thought, her old name for Isolde, the name from before the polish was applied, found out. Let me out! Her voice cracked against the stone walls and came back to her unchanged. She pulled at the ropes until her wrists bled. They didn't give. Whoever had tied them had known exactly what they were doing. One day passed, she thought. Maybe two. She couldn't tell. There was no food, minimal water. The light above never changed. He didn't come, said a part of her that she'd been trying to silence. He knows I'm gone, and he didn't come. She pressed her forehead to the cold stone and did not let herself cry. She had not survived 12 years old and completely alone by crying when things went wrong. She was still pressing her forehead to the stone when the footsteps came. Different from the others. Measured. Familiar. Garrett. He appeared on the other side of the iron bars, and the expression on his face when he saw the state of her wrists was the first genuinely warm thing she had experienced in days. "Gods," he said quietly. "He doesn't remember, does he?" It wasn't quite a question. "He's been poisoned, Wren." The lock gave under Garrett's hands. "A love potion, I traced it to a servant Isolde sent to the mountains before the full moon. There's also a scent erasing agent. That's why I couldn't find you through normal means. That's why he stepped into the cell and began working the ropes from her wrists. "He's not himself. He would never." "I know." Her voice was steadier than she expected. "How do we break it?" Garrett looked at her with the directness of someone delivering information that is true but not comfortable. "You're his mate. If anything can cut through the potion, it's the bond between you." He paused. "I need you to get to him, get close enough that he catches your scent." Wren looked at her bleeding wrists, thought about the dark, thought about 5 days of silence and the terrible, specific hope she had spent all of them trying not to have. "All right," she said. Chapter 6. The return. Garrett brought her to his quarters and put bread and water in front of her and told her to eat. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. "You're his beta, by every expectation. I'm helping you because I'm his beta." He set a basin of warm water beside her and handed her a clean cloth. "I know Declan. I have known him for 15 years. What I've watched for the past 5 days is not him." He sat down and folded his hands. "Here is the plan." She listened while she cleaned her wrists. His plan was precise and careful in the way of someone who has spent years managing impossible situations for an impossible man. "I'll intercept him after you do," Garrett said. "The advisor's letter arrived while you were gone. I have it, the royal seal. Even through the fog, he'll recognize it. But first," he looked at her steadily, "first he needs to remember that you exist." She thought of the stream, the stable, the particular quality of his expression when he said mine. "I can do that," she said. The garden path that ran behind the east wing was quiet in the late afternoon. Declan walked it without particular purpose. That was how things had been lately, movement without urgency, everything requiring the same mild positive attention. Isolde's voice in his recent memory, warm and satisfied, the wedding feeling appropriately near. Then a hand caught him from behind, from a doorway in the garden wall, and the world compressed into the familiar violence of ambush. He was dragged backward before his sluggish instincts could catch up. An arm locked across him. A hand pressed over his mouth. And then, through all of it, the scent hit. Water and dark earth and something that was purely, specifically, irreducibly her. His wolf had been silent for 5 days. Smothered. buried under something thick and foreign that had felt disturbingly like contentment. Now it erupted. The arm released, the hand lifted, and Declan turned in the doorway's shadow and saw Wren pale, wrists wrapped in cloth where rope burns showed at the edges, eyes burning with something that was equal parts fire and grief. "Wren!" Her name arrived in his mouth like something excavated from a long collapse. "You don't remember," she said, not quite a question. Her voice was very steady. "Do you?" His chest tightened. Images moved through the fog, a stream, a stable, a decision made with the full force of everything he was. All of it fragmented, dissolving before he could assemble it. Something is. She put a potion in your wine." Each word careful and clean. "Isolde had me locked in the dungeon 5 days." She stepped closer. "And I need you to come back." She lifted her hand toward his face, slowly, clearly, in no way a threat. And when her fingers touched his jaw, the fog cracked. Not all at once. Like ice over a river, the sound of it, the splitting radiating outward from that single point of contact. "Look at me," she said. Her voice broke at the edge. "Please just look." He looked. The dam gave. Memory returned like a river through a broken wall, all of it. The moment in the corridor on the first night, the stream, the stable, the decision he had made with absolute clarity, the letter to his advisors, the certainty. "She is mine. I will not lie. I will fix it." Wren's eyes had gone glassy with tears she clearly refused to let fall. "What did they do to you?" His voice came out in pieces. She smiled without humor. "Less than they meant to." He took one step, stopped, as if afraid the fog would reassemble if he moved too quickly, as if this might still be something his confused mind was constructing. Wren crossed the remaining distance herself. "Don't think," she said quietly. "Just feel." And she kissed him. The last of the potion's architecture shattered like glass struck at the right frequency. The fog didn't fade, it broke, all at once, replaced by the full, clear, overwhelming reality of everything he'd been made to forget. When Declan pulled her against him, it felt like reclaiming something that had been stolen. "I had to bring you back," she whispered into his chest. "You did," he said. "You did." They held that for a moment, just the two of them in the narrow doorway, the garden quiet around them. Then the fury arrived. It came up from somewhere primal, and it was absolute. Declan breathed through it, his hands in Wren's hair, his jaw set against the roar of his wolf. "She's going to answer for this. Later." Wren's hand pressed flat against his chest. "First we make sure it's completely broken." "It is. You brought me back fully. Don't drink anything she gives you. Don't eat anything she—" "I know." He covered her hand with his. The tenderness in it was at odds with the fury still moving through him. "You are mine. You have always been. I'm sorry I let them take that from me." "You didn't let them." The door at the far end of the corridor opened. Isolde's voice arrived like a sharpened instrument, precise and cold. "Well, someone managed to get free." She walked toward them slowly, arms folded, face arranged into that particular composure that Declan now understood was simply fury that had been trained into a better shape. "It doesn't matter," she continued. "You're going back, Wren, for the crime of using magic against your princess. And for—" The footsteps from the main corridor were heavier, organized. Declan's royal guard entered the passage in formation, and Garrett came through the center of them like a man who has been waiting a long time to have this conversation. "Princess Isolde." His voice was the temperature of deep winter. "You are under formal accusation of the use of forbidden magic and the unlawful imprisonment of a recognized mate bond." He paused. "Specifically, the king's mate." Isolde's composure flickered. "He was promised to me. The arrangement. The only person I belong to is Wren." Declan's voice was quiet and without any performance whatsoever. The authority in it came from somewhere that had nothing to do with politics. Garrett produced the letter, the royal seal clearly visible. "Our kingdom's advisors confirmed under ancient law. When a king identifies his mate, he retains the immediate right to review any prior marital agreement. No kingdom may compel a marriage that conflicts with a recognized mate bond." His gaze found Isolde's and held it. "Furthermore, any action taken against a king's recognized mate, including imprisonment, magical manipulation, or physical endangerment, constitutes an act of diplomatic aggression." He let that land. "Which grants King Declan full legal standing to seek remedy." The room had gone completely still. Then another voice entered from the doorway behind Garrett, where King Aldrich stood with the particular pallor of a man who has heard everything and understands exactly what it means. To everyone's surprise, he went to his knees. "Your Majesty," Aldrich said, his voice breaking. "My daughter acted without the full understanding of, she didn't know the depth of what she was disrupting. I beg you. I am asking you not to turn this into something that cannot be undone." Declan's fury surged. She knew. She used the word herself. "She put my mate in a dungeon for 5 days. He felt Wren's hand wrap around his. Firm, deliberate. He looked at her. She was looking at Aldrich, at the old king on his knees, at the door where Isolde stood rigid with something that was finally cracking into something younger and more frightened beneath the composure. "She couldn't have fully understood," Wren said quietly. "Wren, not the bond, not what it means to your people, to your wolf, to everything that makes you who you are." She met his eyes. "She acted out of fear and pride. That's still a crime, but it's a different kind." She looked at Aldrich. "I don't want a war. I spent 12 years in this castle. I was nobody, and someone here gave me a life." She paused. "I won't repay that with blood." Garrett's voice was the final instrument of formality. "The accusation is recorded. The decision of whether to pursue it rests with King Declan." Every eye in the corridor found him. The last threads of the potion had dissolved entirely. He was himself, fully, completely himself, with his mate's hand in his and the full weight of what he owed her clarity about what this moment required. "The matter of the crime will be handled within your kingdom's laws," he said to Aldrich. "Under your authority and your judgment." He paused. "The engagement is dissolved. Any future relationship between our kingdoms will be purely diplomatic and will be negotiated from the beginning." Aldrich bowed his head. "Thank you for your mercy." Isolde was escorted away by her father before the mask could fracture entirely in public. When they were gone and the corridor had emptied of everyone except Garrett standing at a respectful distance, Declan turned to Wren and pulled her into his arms. "It's over," he said into her hair. She held on. "What happens now?" He leaned back far enough to look at her, to really look. in the way he'd been doing since a cold morning in a training yard when his wolf had first gone still and then erupted. "Now you come home with me. Declan, you can't stay here, and I can't stay away from you." His voice was simple and clear and without performance. "In my kingdom, a king's mate is his queen." She stared at him. "I don't know how to be a queen. You just demonstrated exactly how to be one." He held her gaze, and the corner of his mouth curved. That particular expression she was beginning to understand meant he was about to say something she couldn't argue with. "You have honor. You have wisdom. You chose peace when revenge would have been so much easier." He tilted his head. "And you're extraordinary with a blade." Despite everything, she laughed. "Say yes, Ren. Stand beside me." The tears came, but they were the other kind. The kind that meant something was beginning rather than ending. "Yes," she said. Epilogue. The Queen, the journey south took a week. When the gates of Declan's kingdom came into view, the news had already outpaced the horses. The great hall was crowded when Declan entered with Ren at his side, not behind him, not a careful half-step back in the formal position of someone whose role has been defined by deference. Beside him, level, deliberate. He stopped at the center of the hall and let the silence build before he spoke. "I went north to secure an alliance," he said. The hall was very quiet. "I return with something greater than any treaty." He laced his fingers with hers. "I found my mate." The murmurs moved through the room like weather. "I am not king enough to argue with what the gods have decided." He walked forward, Ren beside him, and looked at the assembled hall, advisors, guards, nobles, servants. "No agreement is worth more than truth." And this woman, he glanced at her, and there was nothing in his expression that was performing anything, challenged me when I needed it, refused to simply obey because it was easier, chose mercy at the moment when she had every right to choose otherwise. He paused. "She will not stand behind me. She stands beside me as my equal." Silence. Then Garrett dropped to one knee. "My queen." One by one, like an idea becoming a fact, the rest followed. Ren felt the weight of it, not a crown's weight, not the weight of expectation or performance, but the weight of a choice that was entirely hers. A life she had not been assigned but had built, one improbable decision at a time, beginning with a kitchen knife in a dark corridor when she was 15 years old. She was no longer the orphan, no longer the servant, no longer the guard in the shadow of someone else's story. 3 days later, with the southern castle warm around them and the forest beginning to exhale its first suggestions of spring, Ren stood at the high window watching the tree line turn gold in the late light. She heard him behind her before he spoke. She always heard him now, not with her ears, but with something that had been awake in her since that first moment in a cold corridor with screams in the distance. "I believe," Declan said, coming to stand behind her, "that you once told me there was no man alive with the authority to command you." She turned her head, slow and deliberate. "I remember. Look at you now." His eyes held that particular gleam, the mischief she'd spent 2 weeks pretending to be immune to. She arched one eyebrow. "I command you." "Oh, absolutely." He moved closer. "Completely. I haven't been in charge of a single thing since I rode through that gate." He placed his hands at her waist, and she could feel the warmth of them through her tunic. His voice dropped. "May I?" She tilted her head to the side. The offering was its own answer. When he pressed his lips to the curve of her neck, it wasn't violence. It was the quietest possible version of everything that had happened between them, a choice made at each step, never once without her voice in it. She breathed out slowly, leaning back against him. He murmured against her ear, "And here is the man who marked you." Ren paused, pulled back just enough, turned to look at him. "And now he commands you," he added, with the expression of a man who knows exactly what he's walking into. She shoved him, hard. "You did not just say that." He was already retreating, laughing, open and unguarded, the laugh of a man who has won something vast and expects to lose every argument that follows. "I absolutely said it. You heard it." There were witnesses. There are no witnesses. The trees. "Get back here, Alpha King." She chased him into the clearing, her cloak flying behind her, his laugh already ahead of her in the trees like something she'd been hearing her whole life without knowing she was waiting for it. Because he could be king of an entire kingdom. But she was the one who had brought him back to himself. And in every way that actually mattered, she had always been the one in charge. Up next, you've got 2 more incredible stories waiting on your screen. If this one hit you, tap to watch the next, and make sure you're subscribed with notifications on. Oh, and drop your city in the comments. I want to see where you're watching from.